The autumn wind whistled through the cracks of Stillwater Bakery's ancient windows, as Nova Elise Wyatt kneaded bread dough with practiced precision. Her movements were mechanical, born from years of early mornings and late nights, but her mind was elsewhere, specifically on the stack of unpaid medical bills hidden in her kitchen drawer at home. "You're being stubborn again," she muttered to the industrial oven, its metal surface reflecting her tired expression. Green-gray eyes stared back at her, framed by wisps of dark blonde hair that had escaped her messy bun. "Just one more batch, old friend. Don't give up on me now." The bakery was quiet at 4 a.m., save for the rhythmic sound of her hands working the dough and the gentle hum of the heating system. Outside, Lake Stillwater's waters lapped against the shore, a constant reminder of the small Vermont town's peaceful facade. Nova checked her watch, a habit she'd developed since Lila's diagnosis, and bit the inside of her cheek. Her sister would be waking up soon for her medication. The home health aide, Mrs. Collins, was there, but Nova still worried. She always worried. The bell above the bakery door chimed unexpectedly, startling her. Nova's heart jumped. They weren't open for another 3 hours. She turned, wiping flour-covered hands on her worn apron, ready to explain this to whoever had wandered in. The man who stood in the doorway made her pause. Tall, with dark hair that brushed his jawline and a well-trimmed beard, he wore a charcoal gray sweater that seemed too expensive for their small town. His presence filled the space in a way that made the bakery feel suddenly smaller. "We're closed," Nova said, unconsciously straightening her floral dress beneath the apron. "Opening hours are posted on the door." He didn't move to leave. Instead, his gray-blue eyes scanned the space before settling on her. "I know. I'm looking for the owner." Nova's fingers found the edge of her apron, twisting the fabric. "Mr. Henderson won't be in until 7. She noticed the man's hands. He was holding what looked like legal documents. Another bill collector. Her stomach tightened. "I can take a message." "Silas Monroe," he said, his voice carrying a weight she couldn't quite place. "I'm buying the building." The dough Nova had been working on suddenly felt very far away. The bakery, her safe haven, her second home, the place where she'd learned to survive after their parents' death, was being sold. Mr. Henderson hadn't said anything about selling. "That's not possible," she heard herself say, even as she noticed the man, Silas, taking in the cracked tiles near the register, the water stain in the corner of the ceiling, the aging equipment that she sweet-talked into working every morning. "It's not just possible, it's happening." He placed the documents on a nearby table, careful to avoid the dusting of flour. "The sale closes next week." Nova felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came whenever her carefully constructed world threatened to unravel. This job wasn't just about income, it was about stability, about having a schedule that allowed her to care for Lila, about being close enough to the hospital for emergencies. "I've worked here for 6 years, she said, hating how her voice wavered slightly. "Mr. Henderson wouldn't—" "He already has." Silas's interruption was gentle but firm. His eyes met hers, and something flickered there. Recognition, perhaps, of the fear she was trying to hide. "But that's not why I'm here at 4 in the morning." Nova crossed her arms, leaving flour prints on her cardigan. "Why are you here?" "Because I've tried your bread." He gestured to the loaves cooling on the rack. "The real bread, not the commercial stuff Henderson pushes. The sourdough you make on Thursdays that sells out by 9. The rosemary focaccia that people drive from Burlington to buy." She felt her cheeks warm. Those were her recipes, the ones Mr. Henderson allowed her to make in limited quantities because they took too much time, too much care to be profitable on a large scale. "I have a proposal for you, Nova Elise Wyatt." The use of her full name made her start. "How do you—" "Small town," he said. But there was something else there, something he wasn't saying. "I've done my research. You're the reason this place still has customers. You're the one who remembers that Mrs. Abbott likes her baguettes slightly darker, that the Michaels kid needs his bread sliced extra thin. You're the heart of this bakery." Nova felt exposed, seen in a way that made her uncomfortable. She'd spent years making herself invisible, doing her job, taking care of Lila, surviving. What kind of proposal? Silas moved closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with the crisp autumn air still clinging to his sweater. "I want to keep you on. Not as an employee, as a partner. The bakery needs renovations, new equipment, a proper marketing strategy. It needs someone who understands business." He paused, his fingers drumming once on the table. "But more than that, It needs you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Nova's mind raced. A partnership would mean more money, better hours, the chance to make her recipes full-time. It could mean affording Lila's treatments without drowning in debt, but it would also mean trusting this stranger, this man who'd walked into her sanctuary before dawn with papers and promises. Nova had learned the hard way that promises broke as easily as hearts. "I need time to think about it," she said finally, turning back to her dough before it could overproof. Of course. She heard him moving toward the door, his boots quiet on the old wooden floor. "I'll leave the proposal here, my number's on it." He paused, and she felt his eyes on her back. "One more thing. I know about Lila." Nova's hands stilled in the dough. The words hit her like a physical blow. The partnership would include health insurance, full coverage, no waiting period. His voice had softened, losing some of its business-like edge. "Just think about it." The bell chimed again, and he was gone, leaving Nova alone with cooling bread and a decision that felt bigger than the small bakery kitchen could hold. She looked at her reflection in the oven door again, at the flour on her cheek and the determination in her eyes. "What do you think, old friend?" she whispered to the oven. "Should we trust him?" The oven hummed in response, and Nova returned to her kneading, trying to ignore the proposal on the table and the way Silas Monroe's eyes had seemed to see right through her carefully constructed walls. Outside, the waters of Lake Stillwater continued their endless dance with the shore, indifferent to the way her world had just shifted on its axis. In 3 hours, she would open the bakery as usual. She would serve coffee and fresh bread, smile at the regulars, and pretend everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore, and as the sun began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Nova Elise Wyatt found herself standing at a crossroads she hadn't seen coming. She reached for her phone, checking the time again. Lila would be awake now, probably writing in one of her journals or creating another playlist. Her sister's strength amazed her, the way she faced each day with quiet determination, hiding her pain behind sarcastic comments and brave smiles. Nova looked at the proposal on the table, then back at her phone. She had decisions to make, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure she could make them alone. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air and turning them to gold. Nova took a deep breath, the scent of fresh bread filling her lungs, and made herself a promise. Whatever she decided, it would be for Lila. It had always been for Lila. But as she shaped the last loaf of bread, her hands moving in the familiar pattern, she couldn't shake the memory of Silas Monroe's eyes, the way they'd held secrets and understanding in equal measure, the way they'd seemed to recognize something in her that she'd thought she'd hidden away. The oven timer chimed, pulling her back to reality. She had bread to bake, customers to serve, a sister to care for. The rest, the proposal, the stranger with knowing eyes, the future that suddenly seemed less certain, would have to wait. But waiting, Nova knew all too well, didn't make choices any easier. It just gave fear more time to take root, and she'd spent enough years letting fear guide her decisions. As she pulled the fresh loaves from the oven, their golden crusts crackling in the cool morning air, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was time to let hope lead the way instead. Lila Marie Wyatt sat cross-legged on her bed, headphones draped around her neck like a lifeline, while her fingers traced the edges of her worn journal. The morning light filtered through her bedroom window, casting shadows on the collage of band posters and Polaroid photos that covered her walls. Her blonde hair, pulled into neat braids, caught the sunlight as she studied her sister's expression. "You're doing that thing again," Lila said, tapping her pen against her knee. "The thing where you try to make big news sound small." Nova Elise stood in the doorway, still wearing her flour-dusted dress from the bakery. She'd rushed home after her shift, the weight of Silas Monroe's proposal heavy in her bag. "I'm not, please." Lila rolled her eyes, but there was affection in the gesture. "I can read you like one of those recipe books you're always scribbling in. Something happened at work, something big." Nova moved into the room, perching carefully on the edge of her sister's bed. She noticed how Lila subtly adjusted her position to hide the pain she was feeling, always protecting, always pretending. The sight made her heart ache. "The bakery's being sold," Nova said finally, watching her sister's face carefully. Lila's green eyes widened. "What? But Mr. Henderson already signed the papers, apparently." Nova smoothed a wrinkle in her dress. "The new owner came in this morning. Before dawn. Dramatic, Lila commented, reaching for her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, no doubt already researching. Who is he? Silas Monroe. Lila's typing paused. Wait, that Monroe, as in Monroe Enterprises? She turned her phone around, showing Nova a business article with Silas's photo. He looked different in the picture, more polished, less real somehow. The guy who inherited that tech empire or whatever. Nova leaned closer, studying the image. The article was from 6 months ago, announcing Silas's unexpected return to Vermont after years in Seattle. There was something about a family tragedy, but the details were vague. He made me an offer, Nova said quietly, to be his partner in the bakery. He wants to renovate it, expand it. She hesitated, then added, it would include health insurance. For both of us. The room fell silent. Lila's playlist hummed faintly through her headphones. Something melancholic and indie that she'd probably stayed up late crafting. Finally, she closed her journal and fixed Nova with a steady gaze. You're worried it's too good to be true. It wasn't a question. Nova smiled faintly. Sometimes she forgot how perceptive her sister was, how years of illness had given her an almost uncanny ability to read between lines and silence. I'm worried about change, Nova admitted. The bakery, it's been our constant, through everything. And this man, he just walks in with his expensive sweater and his proposals and offers you a chance, Lila interrupted. She shifted, wincing slightly, and Nova pretended not to notice. Nova Elise, when was the last time you did something for yourself? Something that wasn't about taking care of me or paying bills or just surviving? Nova felt her throat tighten. You know you're not a burden. I know. Lila's voice was gentle. But I also know you've put your whole life on hold. Your dreams, your bakery. I have the bakery. You have a job at someone else's bakery. It's not the same thing. Lila reached for her sister's hand, her skin cool to the touch. Remember when you used to talk about opening your own place? With that little reading nook I could hang out in, wow, and those weird experimental breads you're always dreaming up. Nova remembered. The dreams had seemed possible once, before medical bills and midnight hospital runs had become their reality. She pulled Silas's proposal from her bag, the paper crisp and official. He knows about your condition, she said softly. He mentioned it specifically when he talked about the insurance. Lila's eyebrows shot up. Creepy or caring, I can't decide. Both, maybe? Nova unfolded the proposal, scanning the details she'd already memorized. He's offered to keep all the current employees, modernize the equipment, let me develop my own menu. She trailed off, reading a section she'd missed before. And he has a sister too. A teenager. Plot twist. Lila grinned, reaching for her laptop. Let me guess. You want me to do some digging? Nova should have said no. Should have told her sister to rest, to focus on her health. Instead, she nodded. Just be careful what you look for. When am I not careful? Lila was already typing, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. Besides, if this guy's going to be your business partner, we should know what we're dealing with. She paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. Was he cute? Lila Marie. What? It's a valid business question. She clicked through several pages, her expression growing more serious. Interesting. Nova moved closer. What? His sister, Hazel Monroe. She's my age. Lila turned the laptop, showing a news article from 2 years ago. Their parents died in a car accident. Silas became her legal guardian, but there was some drama with their aunt trying to contest it. She claimed he was too focused on work to raise a teenager. Nova felt something shift in her understanding of Silas Monroe, the way he'd mentioned knowing about Lila, the intensity in his eyes when he'd talked about partnerships and possibilities. It wasn't just business. He understood what it meant to be responsible for someone else's world. There's more, Lila continued, scrolling. He stepped down as CEO of Monroe Enterprises 6 months ago, handed it over to a board of directors, kept his shares, but she looked up at Nova. He moved back here to focus on his sister. The aunt was making noise about reopening the custody case. The morning light had grown stronger, painting Lila's room in shades of gold and amber. Nova could hear Mrs. Collins downstairs, preparing Lila's morning medications. The world kept turning, kept demanding decisions and actions and choices. What do you think? She asked finally, watching her sister's face. Lila closed the laptop slowly. I think sometimes the universe has weird ways of bringing people together. Like, Maybe two people who understand what it means to put family first might actually make good partners. It's business, Lila, not destiny. Maybe, Lila shrugged, then winced at the movement. But maybe it's both. You won't know unless you take the chance. Nova stood, smoothing her dress again, a nervous habit she'd never quite broken. I should let you rest before your physical therapy appointment. Nova Elise. Lila's voice stopped her at the door. Promise me you'll at least think about it. Really think about it. Not just worry about it. Nova looked back at her sister. So young and yet so wise. So fragile and yet so strong. I promise. Good. Lila was already reaching for her headphones. Because I have a feeling about this one, and my feelings are never wrong. Your feelings told you that purple hair dye would wash out in one shower. Minor miscalculation. Lila grinned. This is different. This is important. Nova left her sister's room, closing the door softly behind her. Downstairs, she could smell coffee brewing, Mrs. Collins's attempt at making their mornings feel normal. The proposal in her hand seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The offer stands. Take the time you need. SM. Nova stared at the message, remembering the way Silas had looked in the pre-dawn light of her bakery, the way his eyes had held stories she somehow understood without words. She thought about Lila's research, about parallel lives and shared responsibilities. Maybe her sister was right. Maybe sometimes the universe did have its own plans, its own way of bringing the right people together at the right time. Or maybe she was just tired of letting fear make all her decisions. She saved the number in her phone, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she considered her response. Outside her window, Lake Stillwater sparkled in the morning sun, its waters holding secrets and possibilities she'd never dared to explore. Finally, she typed, I'd like to meet again, to discuss details. Nova Elise. She hit send before she could change her mind, then headed to the kitchen to help Mrs. Collins with Lila's medications. There would be time for second thoughts later. For now, she had a sister to care for, a decision to make, and a future that suddenly seemed less like a burden and more like an adventure waiting to begin. As she sorted pills into daily containers, Nova found herself humming, something she hadn't done in months. Upstairs, she could hear Lila's music playing softly, a soundtrack to their intertwined lives. And somewhere in this small town, a man with knowing eyes and his own weight of responsibility was reading her message, perhaps understanding better than anyone else could what this moment meant. Change was coming to their quiet corner of Vermont. Nova Elise Wyatt could feel it in the air, as certain as the autumn leaves turning gold outside her window. The only question was whether she was ready to turn with them. The lake house, as locals called Silas Monroe's residence, loomed before Nova like something out of an autumn postcard. Modern lines softened by weathered wood, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the late afternoon sun, and a wraparound deck that seemed to float above Lake Stillwater's gentle waves. She gripped her portfolio tighter, suddenly conscious of the flower that perpetually clung to her clothes, despite her best efforts to look professional. You can do this, she whispered to herself, climbing the steps to the front door. She'd spent the past 3 days preparing for this meeting. Spreadsheets of costs, menu ideas, even a detailed renovation timeline. Everything to prove she wasn't just some small-town baker in over her head. Before she could knock, the door swung open. A teenage girl stood there, blonde hair cut in an edgy asymmetrical style, wearing ripped jeans and an oversized sweater that probably cost more than Nova's monthly rent. Her critical gaze swept over Nova from head to toe. "You're the baker," she said. "Not a question. I'm Hazel. My brother's on a call, but he said to let you in." She stepped aside, gesturing toward the interior. "Try not to get flour on anything too expensive." Nova felt her cheeks warm as she entered, but there was something in Hazel's tone, not quite mockery, more like careful observation. The girl moved with a slight stiffness that Nova recognized all too well from Lila's bad days, though she tried to hide it behind teenage nonchalance. The interior was a study in controlled chaos. Business papers scattered across a modern glass coffee table, books stacked on every surface, and what looked like college brochures hastily shoved under a couch cushion. It felt lived in, despite its magazine-worthy design. "Nice place," Nova offered, following Hazel into what appeared to be a kitchen that would make any chef weep with joy. "It's okay. The view's good for brooding." Hazel shrugged. heading to the industrial-grade refrigerator. Want something to drink? We have whatever rich people are supposed to have, plus normal stuff like Coke. Water's fine. Nova set her portfolio on the kitchen island, noting the high-end appliances that still had their instruction manuals sitting nearby. You cook? Silas tries. Hazel's lips twitched. He burned microwave popcorn last week. The whole house smelled like failure and broken dreams. Nova couldn't help but smile. The mental image of sophisticated Silas Monroe battling with a microwave somehow made him seem more real. I heard that, came a deep voice from behind them. Silas stood in the doorway, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. He'd shed his business jacket, and his rolled-up sleeves revealed forearms corded with tension. The popcorn incident was a temporary setback. Like the great pasta disaster of last month, Hazel handed Nova a glass of water, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Don't you have homework?" Silas asked, but there was affection in his mock-stern tone. "Already done, but I know when I'm not wanted." Hazel grabbed a soda and headed for the stairs, pausing briefly. "Hey, baker lady, if you're going to be partners with my brother, teach him how to use an oven. I'm tired of takeout." Nova watched her disappear upstairs, noting how Silas's eyes followed his sister's movement, tracking her gait with subtle concern. It was the same way Nova watched Lila on her harder days. She seems like a typical teenager trying very hard to seem okay. Silas moved to the kitchen island, standing close enough that Nova caught the scent of his cologne mixed with what might have been coffee. She has good days and bad days. The doctors say the experimental treatments are helping, but he trailed off, and Nova felt the weight of unspoken understanding pass between them. They both knew what it was like to measure life in good days and bad days, in medical updates and careful observation. "Thank you for coming," he said finally, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "I wasn't sure you would." Nova opened her portfolio, needing something to do with her hands. "I brought some ideas. For the bakery." She spread out her carefully prepared documents. "If we're going to be partners, we should be clear about expectations." Silas leaned closer, studying her projections. His presence was distracting, the subtle warmth of him, the way his hair fell forward as he bent over the papers. "These are impressive. You've really thought this through." "I've had these plans for years," Nova admitted. "Just never had the means to implement them. Until now." He looked up, catching her gaze. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. "We could make this work. Nova Elise. The bakery could be something special." The way he said her full name made her pulse skip. She forced herself to focus on the business plans. "We'd need to close for renovations. At least 2 weeks. The staff will be paid during the closure," he finished. "And we'll use local contractors. Keep the money in the community." Nova blinked, surprised. "That's thoughtful. I'm not the corporate monster some people think I am." His smile held a hint of self-deprecation. "I came back here for Hazel, to give her stability, a real home. The bakery," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's not just about business for me. What is it about?" Nova found herself asking, even though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Silas was quiet for a moment, his fingers absently tracing the edge of her carefully drawn plans. Redemption, maybe, or just the chance to build something real, something that matters. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Nova was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the electricity that seemed to hum in the space between them. "I should warn you," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I'm not easy to work with. I'm stubborn. I talk to ovens, and I have very strong opinions about sourdough." His laugh was unexpected and genuine, transforming his entire face. "Good. I hate working with people who don't care enough to be difficult." He reached for a pen, turning to the partnership agreement he'd prepared. "Shall we make it official?" Nova hesitated, her hand hovering over the paper. "There's something you should know first. About Lila's condition." "I know about the experimental treatments," he said softly. "The insurance will cover them. I made sure." She stared at him, thrown off balance. "On how did you—" "The same way you probably looked into me and Hazel." His eyes held hers. "We both have people we'd do anything to protect. It's not a weakness, Nova Elise. It's what makes us who we are." From upstairs came the faint sound of music, something indie and melancholic that reminded Nova of Lila's playlists. The sun was setting over the lake, turning the water to liquid fire. And here, in this kitchen that smelled of fresh coffee and possibility, Nova felt something shift inside her. She picked up the pen, her hand steady as she signed her name next to his. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, sending an unexpected jolt through her system. "Partners," Silas said, the word carrying more weight than its 2 syllables should allow. "Partners," Nova echoed, trying to ignore the way her skin tingled where they'd touched. As if on cue, Hazel's voice floated down from upstairs. "Does this mean we get fresh bread now? Because I'm dying for something that isn't from a plastic bag." Silas rolled his eyes, but his smile was fond. "Subtle as always, Hazel." Nova found herself laughing, the sound surprising her with its authenticity. "I might have brought something, actually." She reached into her bag, pulling out a carefully wrapped loaf of her special rosemary focaccia. "Consider it a peace offering." "Peace?" Silas raised an eyebrow. "Are we at war?" "Not yet," Nova said, surprising herself with the playful tone in her voice. "But I warned you, I'm very serious about bread." He stepped closer, taking the wrapped loaf from her hands. Their fingers brushed again, and this time neither of them pulled away immediately. "I look forward to our battles then." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Nova wasn't ready to name. Finally, she stepped back, gathering her portfolio. "I should go. Lila will be waiting." Silas nodded, but his eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. "I'll have the contractor proposals ready by tomorrow. We can meet at the bakery to review them." "Early?" she asked, knowing the answer. His smile was knowing. "Is there any other time?" Nova left the lake house as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in impossible shades of pink and gold. Her signed copy of the partnership agreement felt heavy in her bag, weighted with possibility and promise. As she drove home, she found herself thinking about the way Silas watched his sister, about the genuine warmth beneath his business exterior, about the electricity that seemed to spark between them despite her best intentions. "Just business," she reminded herself firmly. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't quite true. Nothing about Silas Monroe felt like just anything. The lake stretched out beside her as she drove, its waters holding secrets and possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. Somewhere behind her, in a house too big for 2 people, a man who understood the weight of responsibility was probably sharing fresh focaccia with his sister. And for the first time in years, Nova Elise Wyatt felt like she was moving forward instead of just standing still. The sound of demolition echoed through the empty bakery, as Nova Elise stood in what remained of her workspace, watching contractors tear down the old wall that had separated the kitchen from the cafe area. Dust motes danced in the early morning light, and the familiar scent of yeast and flour was replaced by plaster in progress. "You're doing it again," Silas said from beside her, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Looking at everything like you're memorizing it before it changes." She turned to find him studying her, his usual business attire replaced by dark jeans and a gray Henley that somehow made him look more imposing, not less. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's watching." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Nova brushed imaginary dust from her floral dress, a nervous habit she couldn't seem to break. "The contractor says we're ahead of schedule. We might be able to reopen in 10 days instead of 14. That's not why you're worried." Silas moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "Talk to me, Nova Elise." Before she could respond, the bell above the door chimed, impossible to remove even during renovations, its familiar sound a ghost of business as usual. Nova turned, expecting another contractor or maybe the coffee machine repair person. Instead, she found herself staring at Elijah Carter Brooks. He stood in the doorway, sunlight catching on his short black curls, honey brown eyes wide with surprise. His nurse's scrubs were partially hidden under a light jacket, and his fingers tapped rhythmically against his thigh, a habit she'd once found endearing. "Nova." His voice was exactly as she remembered it. "I heard the bakery was under renovation, but I didn't expect—" He trailed off, his gaze shifting to Silas, noting his proximity to Nova with obvious interest. Nova felt Silas straighten beside her, his casual stance shifting to something more protective. She could practically feel the tension radiating from him. "Elijah," she managed, hating how her voice wavered slightly. "You're back in town." He stepped further into the bakery, absently touching the edge of a draped counter as he moved. Got a position at Burlington Medical Center, pediatric unit. His eyes found hers. I've been meaning to call. About Lila. The mention of her sister's name from his lips made something twist in Nova's chest. Silas must have sensed her discomfort because he moved subtly closer, his arm barely brushing hers. Silas Monroe, he introduced himself, his tone professionally neutral but carrying an undercurrent of something. Nova's business partner. Partner. Elijah's eyebrows rose as he glanced between them. That's new. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. Nova felt the sudden urge to explain, though she wasn't sure what or why. We're renovating the entire space. Modernizing everything. Everything. Elijah's smile was gentle, familiar in a way that made her heart ache. Even that ancient oven you used to talk to. Especially that one. Silas interjected smoothly, though I'm told the new one has an equally good listening ear. Nova shot him a grateful look, catching a hint of warmth in his eyes before he turned back to Elijah. The contrast between the two men was striking. Elijah with his easy charm and open expressions, Silas with his contained intensity and careful words. I should let you get back to work, Elijah said, but his eyes lingered on Nova. But maybe we could catch up sometime. Talk about Lila's treatment options. The pediatric unit has some new protocols that might. I'll have my assistant send you the insurance details. Silas cut in, his voice still pleasant but firm. The new policy covers quite an extensive range of treatments. Nova felt rather than saw Elijah's surprise. The expensive health insurance had been a closely guarded secret, a protection against the whispers that had followed their family since their parents' death. That's generous of you, Elijah said carefully. It's business, Silas replied, though his hand had found its way to the small of Nova's back, a gesture that felt anything but businesslike. Can't we take care of our own? The possessive undertone in his voice sent an unexpected shiver down Nova's spine. She stepped forward, needing space to think clearly. I'll walk you out, Elijah. They moved toward the door, leaving Silas to discuss something with the contractor. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of the lake. So, Elijah said softly, business partner, it's not what you think. No. His smile was knowing. The way he looks at you. Don't. Nova wrapped her arms around herself. You lost the right to have opinions about my life when you left. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but Elijah didn't flinch. I know, and I'm sorry, Nova, for everything. But Lila is doing better, she interrupted. The new treatments are working. She's stronger. And you, his eyes searched her face. Are you stronger too? Before she could answer, the door opened behind them. Nova? Silas's voice carried a note of concern. The designer needs your input on the kitchen layout. She turned to find him watching them, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes intense. Something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a shared secret, a possibility neither was ready to name. Coming, she called back, then turned to Elijah one last time. It was good to see you. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was kinder than the truth, that seeing him again had felt like reopening an old wound, only to find it didn't hurt quite as much as expected. Back inside, Silas was waiting by the demolished wall. You okay? Fine, she said automatically, then caught herself. No, I don't know. She looked up at him, finding concern in his gray-blue eyes. He was Lila's nurse. Before, when things were bad, and more than that, Silas asked quietly. Nova touched the rough edge of the broken wall, feeling the texture ground her. He left when we needed him most, when the bills were piling up and Lila's condition was deteriorating. He said he couldn't handle it. The pressure, the constant worry. She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it, as if I had the luxury of not handling it. Silas was quiet for a moment, his presence steady beside her. For what it's worth, he finally said, I think he's an idiot. The unexpected comment startled a genuine laugh from her. Because he left. Because he had you, Silas said simply, and he didn't fight to keep you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Nova felt her heart skip, then steady itself. She turned to the design plans spread out on a makeshift table, needing to focus on something concrete. God, the new ovens should go here, she said, pointing to the blueprint. And we need more counter space for the specialty breads. Silas let her change the subject, moving to stand beside her. Whatever you need. The demolition continued around them, breaking down old walls to make room for something new. Nova couldn't help but wonder if it was just the bakery being transformed, or if she was changing too, becoming someone stronger, someone who could look at her past without flinching. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set over Lake Stillwater, Nova's phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "Hazel invited me over to watch movies tomorrow. Says she's tired of being the only teen with a complicated life. That okay?" Nova looked up to find Silas reading a similar message on his own phone, his expression softening in a way she was beginning to recognize. "Our sisters are conspiring," she said, showing him the text. "Good," he replied, surprising her. They could both use a friend who understands. She studied him in the fading light. This man who had walked into her life with business proposals and tender hearts, who looked at broken things and saw possibility. "Like we all could," she said softly, and pretended not to notice the way his eyes lingered on her face, full of promises neither of them was ready to make. Outside, the lake waters lapped at the shore, constant and changing all at once. Inside, surrounded by the dust of renovation and the echoes of the past, Nova Elise Wyatt felt something shift in her chest, like a wall coming down, like a new foundation being laid. The bakery would be different when they finished, transformed into something modern and new. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe sometimes you had to let things change to make them better, stronger, more beautiful than before. She caught Silas watching her again, his eyes holding secrets she was beginning to want to discover. Maybe it wasn't just the bakery that was under renovation. Maybe they all were actually in their own way, being rebuilt into something stronger than before. The lake house's kitchen smelled of burned popcorn again, but this time, Nova couldn't blame Silas. She stood in the doorway, watching Hazel and Lila attempt to salvage their third batch while trading commentary about their shared terrible luck with snack preparation. "See?" Hazel gestured dramatically at the smoking microwave. "It's genetic. The Monroe curse of kitchen disasters." Lila, perched on a bar stool with her legs crossed under her, grinned. "Pretty sure my sister would say it's just user error." She adjusted one of her braids, shooting Nova a knowing look. "Right, Nova Elise. Don't drag me into this." Nova laughed, moving to open a window. "I'm just here as emergency backup." "And yet you haven't helped," Hazel pointed out, dumping another ruined batch into the trash. Her movements were stiffer than usual. A bad day, Nova recognized, but her spirit remained undiminished. "Sometimes people need to learn from their mistakes," Nova said sagely, earning eye rolls from both teenagers. "Is that your official business partner stance?" Silas's voice came from behind her, startling her with its proximity. He'd been on calls all evening, dealing with some crisis at Monroe Enterprises, but now he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "My stance is that anyone who can't make microwave popcorn shouldn't be allowed near my new ovens," she retorted, turning to face him. His eyes crinkled at the corners, tired but amused, harsh but fair. He studied the chaos in his kitchen. "Should I order pizza?" "Already did," Hazel announced. "Like 20 minutes ago. We're disasters, not idiots." Nova watched as Lila and Hazel abandoned their popcorn mission, moving to the living room to set up their movie night. The two girls had bonded quickly over the past week, finding common ground in their shared experiences with overprotective siblings and complicated medical histories. "They're good for each other," Silas said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. He leaned against the counter beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "They are," Nova agreed, watching as Lila helped Hazel arrange pillows on the massive sectional sofa. "Lila hasn't had many friends who understand everything. Neither has Hazel." Silas's voice carried a weight of unspoken worry. "The treatments take so much from them. They're normal teenage experiences, but they're still teenagers," Nova finished, still finding ways to be young, to be themselves. The doorbell rang, announcing the pizza's arrival, and Nova watched as the girls argued over toppings and movie choices. The normality of it all made her throat tight. "Stay," Silas said suddenly. When she looked at him questioningly, he added, "For the movie, you're here anyway, and I could use help preventing another kitchen disaster." The invitation hung between them, weighted with possibility. Nova thought about the bakery renovation plans waiting for review, about the stack of invoices on her desk at home, about all the responsible reasons to say no. "Okay," she heard herself say instead. His smile was worth the momentary panic her agreement caused. They gathered their own plates of pizza and settled on opposite ends of the sectional. The girls sprawled between them with their own slices and a bowl of chips they'd managed not to burn. The movie was some indie romance that Hazel had chosen, full of longing looks and almost confessions. Nova found herself hyper-aware of Silas's presence across the sofa, of the way his hand rested just inches from her foot when she tucked her legs up. Halfway through the film, her phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. Need to discuss Lila's new treatment options. Lunch tomorrow. Nova felt Silas shift beside her, his eyes catching the glow of her phone screen. She turned it face down without responding, but the moment had shifted, tension seeping in where comfort had been. You okay? Silas asked later, when they were cleaning up after the movie. The girls had disappeared upstairs to Hazel's room, their laughter floating down occasionally. Fine, Nova said automatically, then caught herself. No, I don't know. She set down the plate she was rinsing. Elijah wants to meet. To discuss Lila's treatment. Silas was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling on the glass he was drying. And you don't want to? I don't know what I want. The admission felt heavy. He was there for the worst of it. You know, when we first got Lila's diagnosis, when everything was falling apart, he knew exactly how to help, what to say. She trailed off, remembering, until he didn't. Until it got too hard, Silas said, his voice carrying an edge of something that might have been anger. Until he had to choose between his comfort and your need. Nova looked up at him, struck by the intensity in his expression. You sound like you understand. I understand choosing to stay, he said quietly. I understand looking at someone you love and knowing their pain is part of your journey too, whether you asked for it or not. The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, more intimate. Nova was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the way his eyes held hers with unwavering focus. Silas, she started, not sure what she was going to say. A crash from upstairs interrupted them, followed by teenage laughter and apologies. The moment broke, reality rushing back in. I should get Lila home, Nova said, stepping back. It's getting late, and she has therapy tomorrow. Silas nodded, but his eyes still held questions she wasn't ready to answer. I'll drive you. It's dark, and the lake road can be tricky at night. She wanted to protest, to maintain the professional distance that seemed to be slipping more each day. Instead, she found herself agreeing. The drive was quiet, punctuated only by Lila's soft snoring from the back seat. Nova watched the moonlight play on the lake's surface, thinking about choices and changes and the way some people stayed while others left. Thank you, she said, as they pulled up to her small house. For tonight, for an everything. Silas turned to look at her, his profile silver-edged in the moonlight. Nova Elise, he said softly, you don't have to thank me for wanting to be here. The words carried more meaning than their simple syllables should allow. Nova felt something shift in her chest, like the last wall around her heart developing its first crack. The contractor called earlier, she said, needing to change the subject. The new ovens arrive tomorrow. I'll be there, he promised. And somehow she knew he meant more than just the delivery. Later, after she'd gotten Lila settled in bed, Nova stood at her kitchen window. She could see the lake in the distance, its waters black and silver under the moon. Her phone still showed Elijah's unanswered text, but for the first time, the sight of his name didn't make her heart clench. Instead, she found herself thinking about the way Silas had looked at her in his kitchen, about the understanding in his eyes when he talked about choosing to stay, about the walls they were both letting crumble, brick by careful brick. Her phone buzzed with a new message. The girls want to make this a weekly thing, something about solidarity in kitchen disasters. Samir, Nova smiled, typing back before she could overthink it. Only if you promise to let me handle the popcorn next time. Nova Elise. His response came quickly. Deal. Though I should warn you, I'm not just giving up kitchen duties. I expect lessons. The simple exchange made her smile widen. Outside, the lake waters lapped at the shore, constant and changing. Inside, in her quiet kitchen, Nova Elise Wyatt felt something new taking root, something that felt surprisingly like hope. She glanced at Elijah's unanswered text one more time, then made her decision. Some bridges needed to be rebuilt, for Lila's sake if nothing else. But others could stay beautifully, perfectly broken. Tomorrow would bring new ovens and old complications, treatments to discuss and decisions to make. But tonight, in the quiet of her kitchen, Nova let herself imagine a future where staying wasn't just a choice, but a promise. where renovations meant more than just new walls and better equipment, where sometimes, just sometimes, the best things in life came from letting the right walls fall down. The new ovens gleamed in the early morning light, their stainless steel surfaces reflecting Nova's anxious expression as she ran her hands over the controls. State-of-the-art didn't begin to describe them. They were practically spacecraft, with digital interfaces and precise temperature controls that made her old friend look like a toaster in comparison. "They're just machines," she whispered to herself, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. "They'll learn to listen too." Already talking to the new equipment, Silas's voice carried a hint of amusement as he approached, 2 coffee cups in hand. "And should I be jealous?" Nova accepted the coffee, noting how he'd remembered exactly how she took it. 1 sugar, splash of cream. "These ones haven't earned conversation rights yet. We're still in the getting to know you phase." Ah, playing hard to get. Smart strategy. He leaned against the new prep counter, his casual stance belying the intensity in his eyes as he watched her. "The contractor says we're ready for the final inspection. We could reopen next week." The news should have thrilled her. Instead, Nova felt her stomach twist. "That's soon." Silas set his coffee down, moving closer. "Talk to me, Nova Elise. What's really bothering you?" Before she could answer, the bakery's door chimed. They both turned to see Elijah standing there, looking professional in his hospital scrubs and white coat. "Sorry," he said, though his expression suggested he wasn't. Door was unlocked. "I was hoping to catch you before your meeting, Nova, about Lila's treatment." Nova felt Silas tense beside her. She touched his arm briefly, a gesture meant to reassure, though she wasn't sure which of them needed it more. "I have 10 minutes, she said to Elijah, then turned to Silas. "Can you check on the delivery schedule for the cafe supplies?" Silas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. As he passed Elijah, he paused. 10 minutes, he echoed, the words carrying a weight of warning that made Nova's pulse quicken. Once they were alone, Elijah surveyed the renovated space. "Looks different, more polished." "That's the point of renovation," Nova said, keeping her voice neutral. "What did you want to discuss about Lila?" "There's a new treatment protocol," he began, moving closer. "Experimental, but promising. The hospital's running trials. We have insurance now," Nova interrupted. "Good insurance. Lila's current treatment is working. Is that what this is about?" Elijah gestured around the bakery. "Insurance? Security?" His eyes softened. "Nova, if you needed help, you could have come to me." The familiar anger rose in her chest, hot and sharp. "Come to you? You left, Elijah. You walked away when things got hard." "I was young," he defended. "We both were. I wasn't ready for that level of responsibility." "And I was." Nova's laugh held no humor. "I was 24, suddenly responsible for a sick teenager and a mountain of debt. You think I was ready? That's different." "Why?" "Because she's my sister. Because I didn't have a choice." Nova moved to the new ovens, needing their solid presence. "Everyone has a choice. Elijah, you chose to leave. Others?" She thought of Silas, of the way he looked at Hazel, of his quiet determination to be there. "Others choose to stay. Like your new partner?" Elijah's voice carried an edge. "I've heard things, Nova, about the Monroe family, about the aunt trying to take his sister away. Are you sure you're not just trading one complicated situation for another?" "Get out." The words came out cold and clear. "Nova." "No." She turned to face him fully. "You don't get to come back here and question my choices. You lost that right when you walked away. Lila is doing well. Her doctors are happy with her progress. If there are new treatments to discuss, they can contact me directly." Elijah studied her face, something like resignation crossing his features. "You've changed." "Yes," she agreed. "I have." The sound of footsteps announced Silas's return. He took in the scene, Nova's rigid posture, Elijah's frustrated expression, and moved to stand beside her. "Your 10 minutes are up," he said quietly. Elijah looked between them, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Right. I'll have the hospital send over the trial information." He headed for the door but paused. "Nova, I really am sorry. For everything." After he left, the bakery felt too quiet. Nova could feel Silas watching her, waiting. "I used to think I wasn't enough," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "When he left, when the bills kept piling up, when Lila would cry herself to sleep, I thought I wasn't strong enough to handle it all. Nova Elise. Silas's voice carried a depth of emotion that made her look up. You are the strongest person I know. She shook her head. I'm terrified. All the time. Of failing Lila, of losing the bakery, of... She cut herself off, not ready to voice the fear of losing whatever was growing between them. Being afraid doesn't make you weak, he said, moving closer. It makes you human. They stood in the morning light, surrounded by new equipment and old fears, close enough that Nova could feel the warmth radiating from him. The ovens arrive tomorrow, she said, changing the subject. The real test will be if they can handle my sourdough. Silas smiled, accepting her deflection. Should I be prepared for more conversations with inanimate objects? Definitely. She managed a small smile. It's part of my process. I like your process, he said softly, and somehow she knew he meant more than just her baking habits. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken words and careful hopes. Finally, Nova stepped back, needing space to think clearly. We should check the delivery schedules, she said, and the staff training plans. Silas nodded, but his eyes held hers a moment longer. Nova, for what it's worth, I'm not going anywhere. The simple promise hit her harder than any of Elijah's apologies. She turned to the new ovens, blinking back unexpected tears. I know, she whispered, and for the first time in years, she actually believed someone when they said they'd stay. Outside, Lake Stillwater's waters reflected the morning sun, constant and ever-changing. Inside, surrounded by new beginnings and old endings, Nova felt something settle in her chest, a certainty that had nothing to do with ovens or renovations, and everything to do with the way Silas Monroe looked at her like she was something precious and strong all at once. Later, as they reviewed plans for the reopening, Nova found herself stealing glances at him, the way he focused on details, how he absently played with his pen when thinking, the gentle way he spoke about making sure everything was perfect for her vision. She thought about choices then, about people who left when things got hard, and people who stayed, building something new from the broken pieces, about walls coming down and bridges being built, about trust and time and the slow, steady way that love sometimes grew in the quiet spaces between fear and hope. The new ovens would take time to learn her rhythms, to understand her ways, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the best things in life were worth waiting for, worth working for, worth believing in, even if they scared you a little bit along the way. The night before the bakery's reopening, Nova found herself alone in the renovated kitchen, testing recipes on the new ovens. The space gleamed with possibility, stainless steel and warm wood, modern efficiency softened by careful design choices. Everything was perfect, ready, waiting. So why couldn't she sleep? Her phone buzzed on the counter, displaying a text from Lila. At the lake house with Hazel. Don't freak out, but you should come. Now, Nova's heart stuttered. She was already reaching for her keys when the door chimed, and Silas burst in, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. Hazel collapsed, he said without preamble, his voice rough. She's refusing to go to the hospital. Lila's with her, but he ran a hand through his hair, which already stood on end from apparent previous attempts. I don't know what to do. Nova was already moving, turning off ovens and grabbing her bag. I do, let's go. The drive to the lake house was tense, Silas's knuckles white on the steering wheel. Nova watched his profile in the darkness, noting the fear he was trying to hide. Talk to me, she said softly. What happened? She was fine all day, he said, voice tight. We were discussing college brochures, making plans. Then suddenly she was so pale, and her hands were shaking. And, he swallowed hard, she won't let me call an ambulance. Says she's tired of hospitals, tired of being the sick girl. Nova recognized the words, had heard similar ones from Lila in darker moments. She's scared. I'm scared, Silas admitted, the words seeming to surprise even him. If something happens to her, if I'm not enough, stop. Nova reached over, covering his hand on the gear shift. You are enough. Sometimes being enough means knowing when to ask for help. They pulled up to the lake house, its windows glowing warmly against the night. Inside, they found Lila and Hazel in the living room, the latter curled up on the massive couch looking smaller than her 14 years. I told them not to worry, Hazel said, but her voice was weak, and her usual spark was dimmed. I'm fine. You're not fine, Lila countered, sitting beside her friend with fierce protectiveness. Your hands are still shaking, And you're doing that thing where you try to breathe without anyone noticing. Nova moved to kneel beside the couch, her nurse's daughter instincts kicking in. Hazel, honey, can you look at me? The girl's eyes were glassy, her skin clammy. Nova recognized the signs from years of watching Lila battle similar episodes. I don't want to go back, Hazel whispered, looking past Nova to her brother. Silas, please. Not tonight. Nova saw Silas's face crumple slightly, saw the way he struggled between respect for his sister's wishes and terror for her health. She made a decision. Okay, no hospital, she said, earning surprised looks from everyone. But we're going to make a deal. Hazel eyed her warily. What kind of deal? I'm going to call someone I trust. A nurse who specializes in cases like yours. He can come here, check you over, and help us decide if home care is enough tonight. Elijah, Silas said, understanding dawning. Nova nodded. No white coats, no hospital smell, no fluorescent lights. She promised Hazel. Just someone who can help us help you. Deal? Hazel looked at Lila, who nodded encouragingly. Deal, she whispered. Nova stepped into the kitchen to make the call, aware of Silas following her. The conversation with Elijah was brief and professional. Whatever their personal history, his concern for patients had never wavered. He'll be here in 20 minutes, she told Silas, turning to find him closer than expected. Thank you, he said, voice rough with emotion, for knowing what to do, for being here, for... He broke off, running a hand through his hair again. I don't know what I'd do without you. Nova Elise. The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Nova found herself reaching up, smoothing his disheveled hair without thinking. He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. Silas, she breathed. But whatever she was going to say was interrupted by Lila calling from the living room. They moved apart, returning to find Hazel looking marginally better, though still pale. Lila had put on some quiet music and was showing her friend something on her phone, keeping her distracted. When Elijah arrived, he handled the situation with professional grace. He checked Hazel over thoroughly while keeping the atmosphere calm and informal, even managing to make her laugh once with a terrible medical pun. It's a reaction to the new medication, he explained later in the kitchen, keeping his voice low. Not uncommon, but we should adjust the dosage. I can coordinate with her regular doctor tomorrow. Nova watched Silas absorb this information, saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. She can stay home? Yes, but someone should monitor her through the night. The reaction should ease by morning, but we need to watch her blood pressure. I'll stay, Nova said immediately. When both men looked at her, she added, Lila's already half asleep on the couch, and I know what signs to watch for. You have my numbers if anything changes. Elijah nodded, gathering his things. At the door, he paused. Nova, you're good at this. You always were. She felt Silas step closer behind her, a quiet show of support. Thank you for coming, Elijah. After he left, the house settled into a strange sort of peace. Lila and Hazel had fallen asleep on the sectional, a tangle of blonde hair and borrowed blankets. Nova stood watching them, feeling Silas's presence beside her. The bakery reopens tomorrow, she said softly. I'll handle it, he replied immediately. You stay with them. She turned to look at him. This man who'd walked into her life with business proposals and ended up becoming something else entirely. We'll handle it together. That's what partners do. His eyes softened, and he reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was intimate, careful, full of things neither of them was ready to name. Partners, he echoed, the word carrying new weight. They settled in for the night. Silas in his study with laptop and coffee, Nova in an armchair near the girls with a book she wasn't really reading. Every hour, she checked Hazel's vitals, noting the gradual improvement with relief. Around 3 a.m., she found Silas standing at the windows, staring out at the lake. The moonlight painted him in silver and shadow, highlighting the worry still etched on his face. She's stronger than you think, Nova said, moving to stand beside him. Then she thinks too. I know. He turned to look at her, his eyes intense, like someone else I know. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and fear, and something that felt dangerously like love. Nova thought about walls coming down, about trust being built, about the way some people stayed even when things got hard. The sun will be up soon, she said, because it was safer than all the other things she wanted to say. Stay for breakfast? He asked. and somehow it felt like he was asking for more than just the morning. Nova looked at their reflection in the window, standing close but not touching, both watching over sleeping sisters, both carrying weights that felt a little lighter when shared. "Yes," she said simply, and pretended not to notice the way his smile lit up the darkness. Outside, Lake Stillwater's waters moved in eternal patterns, reflecting stars and secrets and possibilities. Inside, in a house that had begun to feel like another kind of home, Nova Elise Wyatt realized that sometimes the strongest foundations were built in the moments when everything seemed most fragile. The bakery would open tomorrow, with or without them. The world would keep turning, sisters would keep healing, and hearts would keep finding their way toward each other in the quiet hours before dawn. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Steam rose from the new ovens as Nova pulled out the first batch of sourdough, its crust golden and crackling in the early morning light. The renovated bakery hummed with possibility, every surface gleaming, every detail perfect. Outside, a line had already formed despite the autumn chill, familiar faces pressed against the windows, waiting for the grand reopening. "They're beautiful," Silas said from behind her, and when she turned, she found him looking at her rather than the bread. He'd loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and somehow managed to get flour on his otherwise impeccable dress shirt. "The bread or the ovens?" she asked, trying to ignore the way her heart jumped at his proximity. "Yes," he answered with a slight smile, then sobered. Hazel wanted to be here. Her doctor thought it best she rest another day. Nova set down the bread peel, studying his face. The worry lines around his eyes had deepened since his sister's episode 2 nights ago. "Lila's with her. They're probably critiquing our life choices and making terrible puns." His laugh was soft but genuine. "Probably. Speaking of life choices," he gestured to the front of the bakery, where Mr. Henderson stood among the waiting crowd, ready to show him what we've done with the place. Nova squared her shoulders, brushing flour from her floral dress. Ready. The next hour passed in a blur of congratulations, exclamations over the new decor, and steady sales. Nova moved between the new display cases and kitchen with practiced ease, noting how seamlessly Silas handled the business side, credit card machines, inventory tracking, staff coordination. "The chocolate croissants are even better than before," Mrs. Abbott declared, clutching her usual order, "and young Mr. Monroe actually smiles. A vast improvement all around." Nova bit back a laugh at Silas's expression, somewhere between pleased and embarrassed. She was about to respond when she noticed a familiar figure entering the bakery. Silas's aunt stood out even in the morning crowd, her designer outfit and perfectly coiffed hair a stark contrast to the casual Vermont atmosphere. Her smile was razor-sharp as she approached the counter. "Nephew," she said, her voice carrying above the bakery's cheerful buzz. Quite a change from board meetings and tech acquisitions, isn't it?" Nova watched Silas tense, his easy manner disappearing behind a careful mask. "Aunt Vivian, what brings you to Stillwater? Can't I check on my family's investments?" Her gaze swept the bakery before landing on Nova. "And this must be the baker I've heard so much about." "Nova Elise Wyatt," Nova introduced herself, meeting the woman's calculating look steadily. "Silas's partner?" Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. "Partner? How quaint." She turned back to Silas. "The board meeting is next week. Your presence is required." "I told you I'm not—" "It's about Hazel's trust fund," Vivian cut in smoothly. "Given her condition, certain provisions need to be reviewed." Nova felt, rather than saw, Silas's fury. She stepped closer to him, their shoulders brushing. "I'm sure any discussions about Hazel's future should include her legal guardian," she said, keeping her voice pleasant. "Which, if I remember correctly, is Silas." Vivian's smile turned arctic. "Family matters can be so complicated, can't they? Speaking of which, how is your sister, Miss Wyatt? I heard she had quite an expensive treatment protocol." The threat was subtle but clear. Nova felt Silas move, but she caught his arm. "Lila is doing wonderfully, thank you for asking. The new insurance is excellent, almost as good as having someone who actually cares about her well-being." The older woman's eyes narrowed. Behind them, the bakery had gone oddly quiet, the morning crowd sensing the tension. "Silas," Vivian said finally, "the board meeting. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and congratulations on the bakery. How nice to see you finding ways to keep busy." After she left, Nova felt Silas trembling beside her. Without thinking, she pulled him into the back office, away from curious eyes. "Breathe," she said softly, reaching up to loosen his tie further. "She's trying to provoke you. She's trying to take Hazel," he ground out. "The trust fund, the board position, it's all leverage. She thinks if she can prove I'm not providing proper care, proper opportunities." "Hey," Nova caught his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You are the best thing that's ever happened to that girl. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you two can see it." His hands came up to cover hers, warm and solid. "Nova Elise," he breathed, and then he was kissing her. The kiss was everything and nothing like she'd imagined. Desperate and tender, tasting of coffee and possibility. She found herself pressed against the office door, his body warm and solid against hers, his hands tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, reality came crashing back. The bakery was full of customers. Their staff was probably wondering where they'd disappeared to, and they had about 1,000 things to deal with that didn't involve kissing in back offices. "I'm sorry," Silas started, but Nova shook her head. "Don't you dare apologize." She straightened his tie, letting her hands linger on his chest. "But maybe we should talk about this later," he finished, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "When we're not hiding from our own grand reopening." She laughed, the sound slightly shaky. "Yes, that." They emerged to find the morning rush in full swing, their staff handling everything beautifully. Nova threw herself back into work, trying not to think about the way her lips still tingled or how her heart jumped every time Silas passed too close. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "Hazel says her aunt is the worst. Also, we're taking bets on when you two finally get your act together. Please tell me it's soon because I have money riding on this week." Nova looked up to find Silas watching her from across the bakery, his eyes soft with something that made her breath catch. She typed back, "You and Hazel are menaces. Also, you might win that bet." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of customers, complications, and stolen glances. By closing time, they'd sold out of almost everything, received dozens of compliments, and managed to avoid any more surprise visits from interfering aunts. As they closed up, Nova found herself standing in front of the new ovens, their surfaces reflecting the sunset streaming through the windows. "Thank you," she said to them softly, "for listening today." "Should I be jealous of the ovens?" Silas asked, coming up behind her. "They seem to be getting all your attention." She turned to face him, taking in his loosened tie, the flower in his hair, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and strong all at once. "Not all my attention," she said quietly. He stepped closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Nova Elise," he murmured. "We should probably talk about this morning." "Probably," she agreed, but made no move to step away. "We should also talk about your aunt, and the board meeting, and about 1,000 other things." "We should," he nodded, his thumb brushing her bottom lip. Or, this kiss was slower than the first, a gentle exploration rather than a desperate collision. Nova wound her arms around his neck, letting herself believe just for a moment that sometimes the best things in life came from taking chances. When they finally parted, the bakery was dark except for the security lights, and Lake Stillwater glittered with stars outside the windows. "Come to dinner tonight," Silas said softly. "Both of you. Hazel would love it, and we can figure things out." Nova thought about all the complications, his aunt's threats, their business partnership, the weight of responsibility they both carried, but she also thought about the way he looked at her, about stolen kisses and flower-covered dress shirts, about the family they were slowly building out of broken pieces and brave hearts. "Yes," she said simply, and watched his whole face light up. Outside, autumn leaves danced in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the lake house, 2 teenage girls were probably plotting their futures with the fierce determination of youth. Inside the bakery, surrounded by the scent of fresh bread and new beginnings, Nova Elise Wyatt let herself believe that sometimes love was worth the risk, even if it came with complicated aunts, board meetings, and the constant challenge of balancing hearts and responsibilities. Some things, she was learning, were worth fighting for. The lake house's kitchen was filled with the aroma of burning garlic when Nova arrived with Lila that evening. She found Silas at the stove, staring at a pan of what might have once been intended as pasta sauce with the same intensity he usually reserved for business contracts. "Don't say it," he warned without turning around. Wouldn't dream of it, Nova replied, fighting back a smile as she set down the basket of fresh bread she'd brought, though I'm starting to understand why Hazel keeps emergency takeout menus in her desk. Lila had already disappeared upstairs to find Hazel, their laughter floating down the stairwell moments later. The sound made both adults relax slightly, despite the culinary disaster before them. I wanted to cook for you, Silas admitted, finally turning away from the ruined sauce. To make this real. Nova stepped closer, taking in his rolled-up sleeves, the tension in his shoulders, the way he looked at her like she was something both terrifying and wonderful. Pretty sure it's already real, she said softly, reaching up to brush a smudge of tomato sauce from his cheek. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that made her breath catch. The board meeting is tomorrow. The abrupt change of subject should have given her whiplash, but Nova was learning to follow the complex paths of Silas's worry. What time? 9 a.m. in Burlington. His thumb traced patterns on her wrist. Aunt Vivian's been calling board members all week. She's going to try to force a vote on the company's direction, use it as leverage for Hazel's custody. Then we'll be ready. Nova moved to the stove, assessing the damage. But first, we're going to save dinner. Hand me those onions. They worked together in comfortable silence, Nova guiding Silas through the basics of sauce making, while he told her about the calls he'd been making. To lawyers, to doctors, to board members who remembered him as a child. It's not just about the company, he said as they waited for the new sauce to simmer. Hazel loves it here. She has friends for the first time in years. She's doing better with the local doctors. She has Lila. She has you, Nova added quietly. The best brother she could ask for. Silas looked at her then, his eyes intense. And you. She has you now too. The weight of that trust, that inclusion in their family circle, made Nova's heart ache. Before she could respond, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Whatever you're cooking smells better, Hazel announced, entering the kitchen with Lila in tow. Both girls were wrapped in oversized sweaters, looking pale, but determined, though that's not saying much, considering the first attempt. Be nice, Lila chided, but she was grinning. At least he's trying. Remember my disastrous attempt at muffins last week? I still maintain those were technically weapons, not baked goods, Hazel said solemnly, settling onto a bar stool. Her movements were careful. She was still recovering from her recent episode, but her spirit was undimmed. Nova watched as Silas automatically moved to adjust the heating pad on his sister's chair. The gesture so natural, neither of them seemed to notice it. It was the same instinctive care Nova had always shown Lila, and seeing it mirrored in him made something in her chest tighten. So, Hazel said, her tone too casual to be innocent, are we going to talk about the fact that you two finally got your act together, or are we pretending not to notice? Lila nearly choked on her water. Hazel, we agreed to be subtle. This is me being subtle. I had an entire PowerPoint prepared. Silas groaned. Please tell me you're joking. Guess you'll never know now, Hazel said cheerfully. But seriously, it's about time. The pining was getting painful to watch. Nova felt her cheeks warm as she stirred the sauce. We haven't even had a proper date yet. Pretty sure running a business together, handling medical crises, and dealing with dramatic family members counts as like 10 dates, Lila pointed out. Plus all the longing looks and tension. Okay, Silas interrupted, looking slightly panicked. Who's hungry? Dinner itself was a surprisingly normal affair, filled with comfortable conversation and only minimal teasing from the teenagers. But underneath the domesticity, Nova could sense Silas's growing tension about tomorrow's meeting. After the girls retreated upstairs again, Hazel insisting she was fine despite her obvious fatigue, Nova found Silas standing at the living room windows, staring out at the lake. Stay tonight, he said, without turning around. Both of you. It's late. And with the meeting tomorrow, Nova moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. Silas, I know it's fast, he rushed on. And complicated. Everything about this is complicated. But having you here, having all of you here, it makes the house feel like a home. She thought about the past few weeks, about burned popcorn and renovation dust, about shared worries and stolen kisses, about the way their broken pieces seemed to fit together into something stronger. Okay, she said simply. He turned to her then, surprise and hope warring in his expression. Okay, the girls can share Hazel's room. They'll love it. And she stepped closer, reaching up to trace the worry lines around his eyes. I'll be here, for whatever tomorrow brings. His kiss was gentle but fierce, a promise and a question all at once. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. Nova Elise, he breathed. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they felt like coming home. I think, she whispered back, I'm already there. Later, after they'd settled the girls in for the night and made up the guest room, Nova stood in Silas's kitchen making tea. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of the lake and the girls' muffled laughter upstairs. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elijah. Heard about the board meeting tomorrow. If you need any medical documentation for either girl, call me. Whatever happened between us, those kids deserve to stay together. Nova showed the message to Silas, watching as some of the tension left his shoulders. Thank you, he said quietly, for making me part of your world, for letting me be part of Lila's life, for everything. She set down her tea and moved into his arms, letting herself feel the solid reality of him. Thank you for staying, she whispered against his chest, for choosing this life, this place, these complications, for choosing us. Outside, Lake Stillwater's waters lapped at the shore, eternal and changing. Inside, in a house that was becoming a home, Nova Elise Wyatt held on to the man she loved and prepared for whatever battles tomorrow might bring. Because some things, like family, like love, like the delicate balance of hearts and hopes, were worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a life around, one complicated, beautiful piece at a time. Dawn painted Lake Stillwater in shades of gold and amber as Nova stood in Silas's kitchen, preparing coffee and breakfast for everyone. Her hands moved with practiced ease, finding their way around what had become a familiar space in such a short time. You're making the worry bread, Hazel's voice came from behind her. The teenager stood in the doorway, already dressed in what she called her board meeting armor, a tailored blazer over a soft sweater, looking both young and impossibly grown up. Nova glanced down at the cinnamon rolls she was kneading. Is that what you're calling it now? It's what you make when you're nervous. Hazel moved to sit at the counter, her movements careful but steady, like before the bakery reopening or when Lila had that fever last week. When did you get so observant? Around the same time you and my brother started pretending you weren't falling in love. Hazel's smile was soft. For what it's worth, I think you're good for him, for all of us. Nova felt her throat tighten. Before she could respond, footsteps on the stairs announced the others. Silas appeared first, impeccable in a charcoal suit that made him look more like the CEO he'd been than the small-town baker he was becoming. Lila followed, still in her pajamas but awake, despite the early hour. The board meeting starts at 9, Silas said, checking his phone. We should leave by 7 to beat traffic. We? Nova asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. All of us, he confirmed, moving to kiss her temple. Family stands together. The word family hung in the air, weighted with promise and possibility. Nova looked around at these people who had become so essential to her life. Hazel with her quiet strength, Lila with her fierce loyalty, and Silas, who looked at her like she was something precious and strong all at once. Then we better eat, she said, sliding the cinnamon rolls into the oven. Our big days need proper fuel. The drive to Burlington was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Nova sat in the passenger seat, her hand linked with Silas's over the center console. In the back seat, the girls whispered together, occasionally giggling despite the tension. The Monroe Enterprises building rose before them, all glass and steel reaching toward the morning sky. In the lobby, Elijah waited with a thick folder of medical documentation. Everything you need is here, he said, handing it to Silas. Latest test results, treatment protocols, specialist recommendations, all supporting the benefits of keeping the girls in their current environment. Thank you, Nova said softly, meaning it for more than just the paperwork. Elijah's smile was gentle. Some things are more important than old hurts. He looked at the girls, then back at Nova and Silas. I'll go show them what real family looks like. The elevator ride to the boardroom felt endless. Nova smoothed her dress, one of her best, though it still carried a faint trace of cinnamon, and felt Silas squeeze her hand. Whatever happens, he murmured, we face it together. The boardroom doors opened to reveal Aunt Vivian holding court among a dozen serious-faced executives. Her smile froze when she saw them all enter as a unit. This is a closed board meeting, she said sharply. Family only. Exactly. Hazel spoke up, her voice clear and strong despite her pallor. That's why we're all here. What followed was 2 hours of presentations, arguments, and revelations. Silas presented documentation of the bakery's success, of Hazel's improving health, of the stable environment they'd built. Nova spoke about community involvement, about the importance of chosen family, about the way some people stayed even when things got hard. But it was Hazel who delivered the final blow. "You talk about my best interests," she told the board, standing despite her trembling hands, "about opportunities and advantages and the Monroe legacy. But you never asked me what I wanted." She looked at her aunt. "I want my brother. I want this life we're building. I want Sunday movie nights with Lila and Nova's cinnamon rolls, and yes, even Silas's terrible cooking attempts." A ripple of soft laughter went through the room. Even some board members smiled. "And most of all," Hazel continued, "I want to stay with the people who choose to stay with me, who love me enough to let me be both sick and strong, both a Monroe and just me." In the end, the vote wasn't even close. The board affirmed Silas's guardianship, approved his part-time advisory role that would let him stay in Stillwater, and even allocated additional funds for local medical research. Aunt Vivian swept out without a word, but her power was broken. In her wake, Nova found herself wrapped in Silas's arms, both of them laughing and crying as the girls danced around them. "Let's go home," Silas whispered against her hair. Home. Such a simple word for such a complicated feeling. The drive back was lighter, filled with celebratory plans and teenage chatter. They stopped at the bakery first. Nova insisted on checking the day's sales and making sure everything was running smoothly. Inside, surrounded by the warmth of ovens and the scent of fresh bread, Silas pulled her close. "Marry me," he said softly. Nova blinked. "What? Marry me," he repeated, more firmly this time. "Not for business, not for appearances, not for any reason except that I love you, Nova Elise Wyatt. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you talk to ovens. I love how you fight for what matters and how you've helped make us all whole again. Silas, I know it's fast," he rushed on. "I know we have 1,000 complications and responsibilities and things to figure out, but I also know that I want to figure them out with you. I want morning coffee and burnt dinners and movie nights with our girls. I want forever if you'll have it." Nova looked at this man who had walked into her life with business proposals and ended up giving her everything she'd never dared to want. She thought about choices and chances, about walls coming down and bridges being built. "Yes," she said simply, and watched his whole face light up. Their kiss was interrupted by squealing from the doorway. Apparently the girls had followed them in. Lila and Hazel rushed forward, already talking over each other about wedding plans and room arrangements, and whether they could finally paint the lake house's kitchen. "We're going to need a bigger house," Silas murmured against Nova's hair. "We're going to need a better cook," she countered, making him laugh. Later that night, after celebration dinner, ordered in, at everyone's insistence, and movie night, and tucking the girls into their respective rooms, Nova stood with Silas on the lake house's deck. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of water and possibilities. "A year ago," she said softly, "I thought I was barely holding everything together, just surviving day to day, trying to be enough for Lila, for the bakery, for everything." Silas pulled her closer. "And now? Now I know that being enough doesn't mean doing it alone." She turned in his arms to face him. "It means finding people who stay, who choose you every day, even when it's hard, who build something beautiful out of broken pieces." His kiss tasted like promises and forever, like early mornings and quiet strength, like coming home after a long journey. Inside, their girls were probably still awake, sharing secrets and dreams and plans for the future. Outside, Lake Stillwater's waters moved in eternal patterns, reflecting stars and possibilities. And here, wrapped in each other's arms, Nova Elise Wyatt and Silas Monroe held onto the love they'd found in the most unexpected place. A small-town bakery with an old oven that needed replacing and a new story waiting to be told. Some things, after all, were worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth building a whole life around, one perfectly imperfect moment at a time. And that was exactly how their story was meant to be. 1 year later, the winter sun streamed through Stillwater Bakery's expanded windows, catching on the gold lettering that now read, Monroe and Wyatt Family Bakery. Inside, the morning rush was in full swing. but with a rhythm that spoke of well-practiced harmony. Nova Elise Monroe stood at her favorite workstation, watching as Lila, now in remission and studying part-time at the local community college, expertly handled the morning coffee orders. Beside her, Hazel was arranging their newest creation in the display case, cinnamon maple breakfast rolls that had already developed a cult following among the locals. "You're hovering again," Silas murmured, coming up behind his wife and wrapping his arms around her waist. His wedding ring caught the light as he reached around her to steal a piece of fresh focaccia. "I'm supervising," she corrected, but leaned back into his embrace. "There's a difference." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Like how you were supervising when I made breakfast this morning. You didn't burn anything," she pointed out. "I consider that a successful supervision." From behind the counter, Hazel rolled her eyes dramatically. "You two are still disgustingly cute. I'm telling the adoption agency to reconsider." Nova's hand instinctively went to the folder hidden in her office. Preliminary paperwork for fostering children with medical needs, inspired by their own experiences and the love that had healed their broken pieces. "Too late," Lila sang out, grinning. "They already love us. All of us." The morning light caught on the lake outside, turning the water to diamonds. Inside, surrounded by the warmth of ovens and family, Nova felt her heart swell with gratitude for this life they'd built together. Some love stories started with grand gestures or dramatic meetings. Theirs had started with a business proposal and an old oven that needed replacing. But maybe that was perfect because real love, like good bread, needed time to rise, patience to develop, and faith to become something beautiful. "I love you," Silas whispered against her hair, and even after a year of marriage, the word still made her heart skip. "I love you too," she replied, watching their family, whole and healing and perfectly imperfect, create their own kind of magic in the bakery that had brought them all together. Outside, Lake Stillwater's waters continued their eternal dance with the shore. Inside, in a bakery filled with love and possibility, their story continued, not just surviving, but thriving, one sweet moment at a time. The end. Based on the emotional journey of Nova and Silas, here is an impactful question. What would you choose? A life of safe stability, where you never take risks but also never get hurt, or a life like Nova and Silas, where opening your heart to love means being vulnerable, but also offers the chance of incredible happiness? Think about what Nova risked when she decided to trust Silas, both with her heart and with her sister's future. Was the risk worth it? What would you have done in her place? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. Your feedback is very important to our work. Please leave a comment telling us what you think and where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. Your participation is very important for the continuation of our work, so share it with those who will love this story.